Navin, Billboard.
Welcome, distinguished speakers, guests, and friends. Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, and warm greetings to all of you. I am Ashley Sananan of Trinidad and Tobago, an independent researcher specializing in historical studies. I hold a bachelor's degree in history with a minor in literature from the University of the West Indies. This is the 308th edition of our ICC Thought Leaders Forum. We wish to sincerely thank all of you who have graciously contributed to all the success of this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean and Pan-Indian Diaspora global project. For 307 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday. In the past 5 years and 6 months, we have featured 1,234 presenters speaking on 307 topics. We are pleased to have speakers and participants in this meeting from all parts of the world in different time zones. This weekly forum is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. In order to improve this weekly program, we are asking for suggestions and volunteers. If you choose to give a donation to sustain the program, Dr. Mahabir should be contacted to provide details and will ensure that your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials. I am pleased today to introduce our moderator, who is Shalima Mohammed, who is also the co-director of this ICC Zoom platform. She is a cultural and heritage consultant, business psychologist, teacher, and researcher from right here in Trinidad and Tobago. Shalima, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ashley. We're pleased to see you again, and Assalamu alaikum to everyone. Namaste, warm welcome to all of you here in the Zoom room, as well as to those of you viewing on the live stream on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. We appreciate your choosing to be here with us. It's a privilege to have with us a cadre of speakers to speak today on the material records of indentureship and their afterlife. A little bit about that: material records and artifacts of Indian indentureship, such as religious icons, cooking utensils, clothing, tools, and personal keepsakes, offer intimate insights into the lives of those who were transported across the colonial world as gramitias, or contract laborers, or indentured immigrants. Unlike official textual records, these objects preserve traces of everyday experience, revealing how individuals maintained cultural practices, adapted to new environments, and forged community under harsh conditions. In their afterlife, these artifacts have become powerful carriers of memory and identity. So where can we find these artifacts? Are they preserved in homes? Can we find them in museums and cultural institutions only? How are they used by descendants? Can they help us to reconnect with ancestral histories and to assert a sense of belonging within diasporic societies? How do artists and scholars reinterpret these objects? Ladies and gentlemen, we'll hear from our speakers today, and it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Virasamy Salvakumar of India to speak to us first. He's an archaeologist at Tamil University in Tanjavur, India, whose research includes prehistoric and historical archaeology, the Indian Ocean, and diasporic studies. Welcome. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Yeah. Can you share my presentation? Thank you,
Certainly.
Dr. Kumar Mahabir and Shalima Mohammed. I'm indeed very happy to be here. Today, I'm going to speak on South Indian diaspora. I'm not particularly speaking on material culture. So, I'll be focusing on the broad overview of South Indian diaspora, and I'll be talking about one particular textual source called Kangani Chindu. Next, please. So, my aim today is to give an overall view of diaspora from southern India in various parts of the Indian Ocean. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah, coming to this indentured laborers, we need to look at the role of labor in history. Previous one, please. You should, yeah, anyway, it's not a problem. Yeah, we need to look at the role of labor in history. The idea of providing service probably emerged in the Neolithic times when social complexity began to emerge, and along with it also emerged slavery. And slavery was one of the important component of ancient and medieval societies, and it had different forms and different meanings in different societies and different spatio-temporal contexts. We cannot give a universal meaning for slavery across space and time. It varied. Sometimes it was a kind of relationship. We cannot compare the slavery that existed in the colonial or modern period with the kind of slavery that existed in the ancient time. And apart from that, labor had a very important economic value. It led to new dimensions in social and economic development. Therefore, labor is a very important concept. Unfortunately, not many historians have focused on the importance of labor in shaping up various cultural and economic developments. If you go deep into the functioning of societies at micro as well as in macro scales, it always involved in organizing and managing labor, and also it involved several ramification in utilizing that labor for various economic development as well as political and social developments. Now we'll come to this indentured labor. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the practice of slave trade is old, as I already mentioned, but it all varied. We have several references for the existence of slave in the medieval South Indian temple inscriptions, and some people have sold themselves to the temples because of, probably because of their poverty, and also because of other reasons. We get numerous references. So when we talk about slave and slavery and slave trade, it was not just in the colonial period. We had different forms of slavery existing in various space and space-time contexts. We have also evidence in the late medieval period. During the Mughal period, we have evidence from Mughal records for the existence of slavery. Next, please. So, yeah, next slide. Anyhow, I'm right. Okay. So after 1834, this indentured labor system became very popular. It became another means of acquiring and utilizing labor after the abolition of slavery. And this system prevailed for almost a century, and it displaced more than 1.6 million Indians across the Indian Ocean and even beyond in the Atlantic. What we call as grimitias, they had to sign a contract for 5 or 7 years or more, and beyond. And this has created tremendous impact in socio-cultural relationship within the community and beyond. As we all know, how these people suffered while traveling, and they were given false promises, and they were promised, there were trees. I had heard stories from these people. I had interviewed some of these Indians who had returned from Burma. They were promised there were trees in which gold was grown, and they can simply go and pluck. They were so innocent. Some of the people were so innocent, they didn't know what was there in the foreign country. They were promised they could collect gold just like that from the trees, and believing that these people went beyond their own native villages with the future of their families and their generation in mind, and finally to earn nothing other than suffering. This we have come across through numerous interviews. Next, this particular slide. Next slide, please. It shows the distribution of indenture migration to various colonies. We can see the figures 1834 to 1900 in Mauritius, and also in British Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, and all these places. Next slide, please. So, colonialism and capitalism were the main causes for the uh, this exploitative and dependence on low-cost labor service, and this has created a lot of ramification the societies and indentured laborers, and also it created its own hierarchy. Kanganis or Maestris and other revolutionaries and convicts, and they had to move across to find better prospects, and each of them had their own dreams and their own system in which they had to function, in which the indentured laborers were the most suffered lot, and they had to endure poor traveling condition and poor living conditions, which actually affected their entire life and entire generation, and their stories are still in their memories, which we can document from their relatives who are living here in many parts of the Indian diaspora across the globe, as well as in India. And what are the factors that were pushing for this labor migration? We can divide this into push and pull factors. Northrop, in his 1995 book, identifies population growth as one of the factors. India's population grew from 185 million to in 1800 to 285 million by 1900. And also it is said the South Indian population tripled during this period, and there were a resource crunch. There was competition for resources, and also poor living standards and poverty and famines, mainly 19th century famines, boosted this particular growth. And what are the pull factors for labor migration? Greener pasture, and these laborers were promised better livelihood, and so they thought they could earn better, and with the prospect of greener pasture they moved, and they were given false promises of high salary. And also many of the workers believe in dignity in working in alien landscape. That is also prevalent even today in many parts of the world, where workers who are paid low in a particular region, they move away and work with the prospect of better economic wealth. So this is a common practice. Just a second. Welcome. And this is one of the factors. And next slide, please. Uh, so we have a lot of data on the migration of Indian laborers to different parts. We have data from Burma. In 1931, we have about 1 million Indian population as laborers working in various categories in Burma. And this figure crossed between 1910 to 1935 to about 2 million. So we have a lot of laborers working in and some of the agrarian sectors in the fields. And also we have evidence of Chettiar money lenders. We have the story of this death railway that were built by the Japanese during the Second World War, and that caused numerous suffering to these migrant laborers. This was one of the uh, important story, poignant story related to the diaspora. Hello.
Please
Yes.
continue, sir.
Yeah. So this was one of the important factor that affected these people across. And we have also evidence of different communities, different groups living in this particular area of Burma. This is the statistics related to the population of India, Indian migrant population in Burma. The statistics reveals data from 1871 to 1931. We have different communities, the Muslims and Telugus, Hindustanis, Oriyas, and Bengali and Tamil population moving into Burma in different period of time. This is another data and that explains the overall pattern in the migration in Sri Lanka, across Sri Lanka, Malaysia, and Burma. And here also we can see the increase from 1871 to 1946. This is the map showing the death railway that was built in between Burma and Thailand, and that caused numerous suffering. Coming to this Malaysia, and several workers were transported to Malaysia for working in the tea and rubber plantation. This figure is also very remarkable. Between 1898 and 1938, we have more than 1 million people moving across. This figure again increased over the years in the later periods. And this is the pattern that we see in the period between 1900 and 1941. And this is the pattern of different linguistic groups of southern India who were distributed in different parts of Malaysia. And we have a lot of evidence for this movement in different islands, and mainly in the Sri Lankan island. We have a lot of coffee plantation that came up in the 1827, and from then onwards they had problem with the coffee plantation. They started tea plantation in 1867, and that also contributed to migration of a lot of South Indian laborers into Sri Lanka. You know about the story of Indian migrants in Sri Lanka, especially the Tamils who were living in the hill areas. They had to endure a lot of difficulties living in the coolie lines, and they had to face difficult condition. After the decolonization, after the decolonization, especially under Shirmavo Sastri Pact, more than 500,000 Indian diaspora returned to Sri Lanka. This is an image of tea plucker, where in this context we have a lot of men and women being taken to Sri Lanka with the promise that these trees grow a lot of gold, and that can really, improve their wealth. This is the story that we come across in many of the households, the people who have come to India. South Indians in the Caribbean, this is another story. We have a lot of movement of South Indians into Caribbean islands. We have people moving to Reunion, the French Caribbean islands of Martinique and Guadeloupe, and also French Guiana, Trinidad and Tobago. We have a lot of such evidence of these people moving, and there's many of them actually moved from Karaikal and Pondicherry region. We have a lot of evidence for that, and this is the statistics related to uh, these people moving into this area. Next, uh, can you change the slides, please? Yeah, yeah, more. I think I moved. In yes, yes. Yes, some more slides. Yeah, I showed, I presented all this. Yeah. Next, next, next. Yeah, next. Yeah, this is a data from Sri Lanka. Next, please. 1 second. Yeah, this is the data from American colonies. Next, next, please. Next. Yeah, these are the ports of Tamil Nadu from which all these diaspora moved out, mainly also from Mumbai and Calcutta, which are not in the map. And there are several other ports on the east coast where these migrant laborers were taken, and then they were shifted to major ports, and then they were taken across. So they belong to different classes like service class, washermen, workers in the ports, and traders, businessmen, and craftsmen, weavers. All these groups also moved, and sometimes we also get evidence for shopkeepers. We have certain Muslim shopkeepers who had their own shop in Singapore and Malaysia, and also some of the entrepreneurs. So it is not only the especially when it comes to Southeast Asian migration, also other type of workers and entrepreneurs who moved in a small scale. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is another important text about which I'm going to talk. This is known as Kankani Chindu. Chindu is a kind of classical literary tradition of the later period, which became popular mainly during the colonial period. It talks about the mysteries or the middlemen, the Kanganis, who were actually giving false promises, who the agents who time they even kidnapped them. Sometimes they really sold them, and there were a lot of records which mentioned that how these people were taken away from the market, and even sometime they even kidnapped the innocent people who had run away from their home with the false promise, and then sold them to the main agent, and then they were taken away. So here, this particular poem, if you poetic narrative, if you see, it very well reveals how these Kanganis were actually cheating people. They say that this particular poem was composed by a local person who says that if you depend on these people, your life will be lost. It was a kind of warning given to the public. It was a kind of educative material which was published in a small booklet and distributed. And this text was published about 100 years ago. It says that only God can help you once you board the ship. You would see the port of, after tough 6 days of voyage, you leave this berth and reach the foot of the Lords. This is the promise these people give. And also claim these twice born means upper caste people or Brahmins. Traveling by ship is no sin, nothing wrong. If you board the ship and earn plenty of wealth, you can close the gate on the money lenders. So this is the promise they were giving to the people. That is narrated in this poem. These sinners, low life would convince you nicely, and these are the people who there are people who trust them. They invite them to home and treat them with food. This is the ploy that they use. They nicely invite and offer a lot of hospitality, and give them nice talk in order to convince them, so that they can be taken to the main agent and sent across. So they were using all kinds of the vices to attract these people. So that is narrated in this particular poem. They offer prostitutes. It is said in this particular text, the cheaters of the Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga is an age which is generally considered as the later period. It occurs in the Indian inscription. Kali Yuga is the age where all kinds of evil things happens. So this is one way of perception in Indian tradition. When things transform and change, they attribute everything to Kali Yuga. And these cheaters of the Kali Yuga are revered as gods. Fools are those who trust their words now. So this is a kind of warning to these people. Next, please. So they take people like cattle. Sometimes even today in the modern low cost aeroplanes, people say that the travelers are taken like cattle, and they describe this as a cattle class. So we have a similar kind of narrative occurring in this particular text. And lock them in the sheds and chain and or handcuff them. So there's sometime people wanted to leave, they were handcuffed. They offered 5-year contracts. People borrow and jewels in order to meet the minimum expenses. Even this happens even today. People who travel to Gulf and other countries, they borrow money, and finally they get minimal salary. So it's a very parallel thing what is happening even today, although not to the extent of indentured in this particular poem. So this very clearly narrates what were the conditions under which this indentured labor system was working, how the people perceived it from an indigenous understanding, and created these social evils in a particular literature so that it could be disseminated. So there were also a mechanism that were working against this. And not all these people were convinced. Not all people who were suffering because of from poverty were taken away. Only those people who were innocent, who were not educated, or who were not literate, they were taken away. And this particular text really helps us understand how people have understood the system of Kangani, and how these migratory laborers were suffering. So in that context, this indigenous text really reveals us some of the insights into the system of indentured laborers and these migrant workers and their condition. There are several other texts and other documents. If you really look at them, we can understand the social conditions, how things were happening. It is not that these people were simply taking everybody away. There were people aware in the society. They were trying to give warning to these people. These things were also happening. And even though these things happened, many people had to move away because of their absolute poverty, or with the thinking that their fortunes will change because of the greener pastures. So this is the kind of understanding we get by looking at this particular text of Chindu, Kankani Chindu, Kapaletum Kankani Chindu. Kapaletum means the Kankanis who forcefully put you on the ship. Next, please. I think this is the last slide. Thank you. I think I am well within the time. Thank you.
Dr. Veerasamy, a very, very informative presentation, so rich in statistics. I really appreciate that. I really have some questions for you about that that poem at the end, the Chindu. But I think what we'll do is we'll hold the questions for after. Dr. Shadman, and I see your hand up, but if you don't mind, let's take questions at the end of all three presentations.
Yes, I
Is
have
that
two
okay?
questions here. I have two questions. Very thank you for this information. I can
Yes,
tell you
please.
that the
Let's
Dakshina.
hold.
Pardon?
Let's hold the questions, please, Dr. Shadanan. Let's
Yes,
hold them till the end.
yes, the question you mentioned that was total
No,
1
the question,
million.
we'll take question after Baba, after all the speakers.
Yeah, we'll take questions at the end after the presentation. Sorry. So,
Sorry.
Dr. Veerasamy, very, very interesting. I want to thank you very much for that. Let me just introduce our next speaker, and this is Professor Mark Hauser of the US. He's here with us in TNT. We're so happy to have him. He's a professor of anthropology at Northwestern University, whose recent projects include the material legacies of Indian indentureship right here in southern Trinidad. Welcome, Professor Hauser.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the opportunity to give this talk, and I really appreciate these forums that I've been able to attend for the past half year. So thank you so much for this. I'm going to share my screen now, and when I do, can you let me know if you see the presentation? Can you see the presentation?
It's visible, yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So today, I really just want to talk briefly about the material record of indentureship, not only in southern Trinidad, but maybe also provide some context to this. And I should begin by saying that I am a professor of anthropology, but in the United States, one of the ways in which you can be a professor of anthropology is to be an archaeologist. And I'm an archaeologist that focuses on the relatively recent past, the past 500 years associated with colonialism. And my interest is very much involved with the material culture, the material registers of everyday life, especially for agrarian workers. And today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about generally what is the material record of the archaeology of indentureship. And then I'd like to move on to the specific project that we're framing in Trinidad right now. And what I would add is that this project I'm going to talk about in Trinidad is not just the result of my efforts, it's the result of a very large team. This team includes members of the National Trust, including Karishma Nanu, Zara Ali, Ashley Morris, Shad Gobind Singh, but also the efforts of members of staff at the University of the West Indies. And so if I talk as if this is just my efforts, I apologize. There's a whole level of scholarship beneath the waves that have made this possible. So to begin with, if we think about what archaeological research has been conducted on indentureship and its afterlives in the world, there actually has been quite a few. But what I would add is much of these projects in which archaeology has taken place and indentureship has been explored, the indentureship aspect has been, I wouldn't say an afterthought, but something that has been studied as a result of finding something that the archaeologists and historians had not expected to initially. So there are actual archaeological sites. Dr. Julia Haynes, who will be talking in a little bit, has actually conceptualized and framed the project at Bordeaux, specifically around indentureship. But if we look at the earliest projects, the projects in Jamaica, in Fiji, and in Grenada, these are projects that have been documenting indentureship as part of a larger landscape history in which Indian laborers were one of the more recent migrants into the agrarian landscape. Now, when we talk about the material record, we have to first of all think about those very durable aspects of the material record. And for those of you in Trinidad, you might recognize this from the news most recently. This is the copper factory in Cedar Grove Estate, which is just outside of San Fernando. And in many ways, there is a very durable record. These are often, this durable record is not necessarily of indentured Indians themselves, but provide the context in which indentured Indians labored and sometimes lived. One of the very important aspects here is that we have to remember that indentured workers not only came to work on sugar estates, but in a wide range of activities. And understanding the diversity of labor experiences helps add flesh to some of those statistics that Dr. Selvakumar was talking about earlier, the different kinds of crafts that were coming into places such as Trinidad. We also have to think about landscape modifications. One of the things that initially drew me to the southern Trinidadian landscape is the way that water irrigation systems reminded me so clearly of the way that water was both managed in everyday life, but also in agriculture, to those systems that one might find in the Kaveri River Basin or in Eastern Bihar. The use of canals, aqueducts, tanks as not only ways to store and move water, but also to transfer water into the aquifer and manage wet seasons and dry seasons when there's too little water and too much water. And so part of my interest and part of the interest of REACH has been thinking about what is the history of these kinds of landscape modifications? When do we first see this arriving? We also have to think about material culture that was specifically designed to be taken apart and to be removed, the ephemeral material culture, such as atasia that you see here. That's associated, of course, with Jose or Muharram, but that this kind of material culture in and of itself is probably not something that is going to be documented in the archaeological record, yet its presence shapes it in very real ways. And so we never may find atasia or the bamboo wood structures or the paper that surrounded it. We do have to think about the ways in which the communities we're looking at are very plural communities, either religiously plural or ethnically plural. And just on that very note, while Bihar and the Gangetic Plain are, of course, a very important linguistic, social, cultural originary for Trinidad, we also cannot underestimate the kind of presence of the South Indian aspects that come into Trinidad as well. And so we also have to think about the cultural, linguistic, and religious plurality and the way that that might be materially manifested. And then finally, we have to think about differential preservation. One of the things that I've been very struck about in last week's presentation, but also previous presentations, is the way that various members of this community have brought up musical instruments, such as the harmonium. And I can pretty much guarantee you will never find a full functioning harmonium in the archaeological record. Wood will decompose, gut strings might fall apart, but we may very well might find parts of instruments that people had brought with them or had made here through their own craft within Trinidad. And so when we look at the archaeological record, one of the things that we as archaeologists think about is what is going to survive in the record and what might disappear and disintegrate, and how that might frame a kind of patterning in the soil that we recover. We also have to think not just about landscapes, but we can think down at the level of sites and what are called features. Features in and of themselves are not artifacts that you can pick up and take with you, but they are nonetheless cultural, physical constructions of humans on the universe. So if you look at, for example, this raised platform in the left-hand photo, this is from a laborer's house in Tarangabadi, just outside of the place that Dr. Selvakumar was talking about, Karaikal, in which probably one of the community members eventually was conscripted into the indentured working. On the upper right-hand corner, you also have a house platform that Dr. Julia Haynes had documented in Bordeaux. And in the lower right-hand corner is a house that Douglas Armstrong and myself documented in the late 90s and early thousands related to an indentured worker at Seville Estate in Jamaica. Now, what I'd like to point out is there's nothing inherent in each of these that makes them particularly attended to indenture. But if you look at the spatial organization and if you look at how things were made and how the space was used, it does give insights into two very important elements of material culture. One of the most important things that people brought with them on the boats when they traveled from one place to the other was not the objects in their hands, but the ideas they carried in their mind. And this includes the use of space. It also includes another important element, which is these spaces document the kind of predicaments that people were facing in their new conditions, how they were navigating it, and the kinds of resources that they could use, and think inventively about their new space. Because sites like the site that you see here on the left-hand side that are so very difficult to determine unless you've got years of experience looking for platforms, one of the ways we easily identify it are in the actual artifacts, the things that people pick up, hold, carry with them, and use. They could be objects of religious significance, but they can also be objects of everyday use, which is what you see here. And what you have are the range of kind of materials that we would find on an archaeological site, including glass bottles, ceramics, shell beads. And these are the kind of things that tell us a lot about how people assembled the world around them. I think the final thing, going to kind of some of the smallest scale elements that we will look at in the archaeological record, are the botanical legacies. And in some ways, one of the things we do when we excavate is we sample the soil for carbonized seeds and even for what are called plant microfossils, pollens and phytoliths that can tell us about the kinds of plants people were growing. And this is really important because I think there are two things. First, it tells you specifically about how people were navigating the environment, but it's also telling you the kind of plant species that people brought with them. In this case, what you're looking at is fennel seeds that we have recovered on a site in Caribbean. Now, why that's important is oftentimes when we talk about the botanical interchange between the Americas and Europe, Asia, and Africa, we talk about the Columbian Exchange and botanical gardens like you have in Trinidad or in Mauritius or in St. Vincent are oftentimes seen as an important agent. But as Dr. Brinsley Samaru brought up, we also have to think about the human agents, the people in their jahaji bags who brought seeds with them and planted them in their own spaces and actually shaped the actual environment for their own making. And I think this is a really incredible element that we can actually deploy and use very seriously in the archaeological record. It's not easily done, but it does add more to the historical record that we have. I'd like to turn now to thinking about how we're trying to put some of these ideas into practice in Trinidad. Now, this is under the auspices of REACH, Researching Environment through Archaeology and Community Heritage. And this is a joint project between UWI St. Augustine, Northwestern University, and the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago. The idea behind this project is to build on the community knowledge, specifically in southern India, of heritage. We want to talk about identifying place names, archaeological sites of significance, and botanical heritage, and most importantly, the relationship between these three. Most directly, it's to train the next generation of historians and archaeologists on hands-on research for things that the community finds are important in Trinidad. But it also is an attempt to connect past environments to present challenges. So if we think specifically in southern Trinidad, flooding has become a major issue. But this is not a novel issue. This is an issue that many of the indentured workers who later became settlers in the Orapooch Lagoon had to navigate. And we can use those past solutions to think about dealing with present day challenges. Now, I want to say this is not just a project done in isolation. There are really important community members and stakeholders that have been helping out with this, including the Palm East Historical Society, who's been collecting oral histories for some time in the area, as well as the Penel-Debe Regional Corporation, who has really done a wonderful job in facilitating all of this work. Now, the scope of it is to really think of the life cycle of indentureship and its afterlife. So beginning with Nelson Island, the point of entry for most indentured workers into Trinidad, as well as the suite of installations that were associated with Nelson Island. So the isolation hospital at Lenigan Island nearby. To think about then how life is transformed as people are then moved into plantations as part of the workforce. Lives, and according to the documentary history, many of those lives moved directly right into barracks, attached dwelling spaces that are relatively congested. And then finally, what happens when people move beyond the estate? Now, some people did return to India, but many people also either through settlement schemes or through their own innovations, such as folks at Puzzle Island, created pioneer settlements in places that were once considered less than ideal for, let's say, plantation land, but then turn that land into a breadbasket for the entire island. Today, I'm really just going to be focusing on the estate portion of this and an estate that is located in what is present-day Palm East Park. That estate, confusingly enough, is actually Philippine estate. And one of the reasons why we started here is we could leverage really high resolution archival detailed information, including the immigration documents of indentured workers that came to work at Philippine estate. But we could also rely on travelers' accounts and narrative accounts of the area that talk about laborers' lives in Philippine estate. So if we go back to the Tazia as one of the examples, one of the things that's really important about Philippine estate is the site, according to Presbyterian missionary Kenneth J. Grant, it's the site of the first Tazia in the entirety of Trinidad. The Tazia is, of course, that essential shrine to the martyred brothers that's associated with Muharram, that is part of Jose. And importantly, at the end of it, it's dismantled and taken apart. But this, if we are to believe Kenneth J. Grant, and there's no reason not to, this becomes a really important site of national significance, where you actually start to see this kind of important expression. I would say that it's also associated with some of the crackdown on Jose that colonial governments did 20 years after that Kenneth J. Grant is talking about in the 1870s. But it's, again, what we have here is a site of national significance. It also has a fairly good documentary record in itself in terms of how the landscape is formed. We have the benefit of property maps showing the actual plantation grounds in southern Trinidad at the time. And we have photographs, and I have to say, I have to thank both the West Indiana Library as well as Facebook pages of community historians who've been amassing photographs of the estate at the time. Now, the estate, a Philippine estate, is located in what is today Palmuse Park, and this is what it looks like. And again, as I mentioned before, there's a host of community actors, as well as local archaeologists and historians who have been very helpful in bringing this together. Now, we first became aware of this as a potential site in part because a University of West Indies student was walking across it and saw a huge density of broken artifacts on the ground. Pots, plates, glass bottles, things that we would associate with the material culture of residential life. The important thing, however, is it was located in an area where none of the maps showed these houses before. And so this is what initiated the research, and we conducted what is oftentimes called the low-impact archaeology. This included oral history and participatory mapping. It included, and you can see one of our students doing that in the upper right-hand corner. It also included students systematically walking across the park and actually documenting artifacts, features, and landscapes as they come across it. And what they were able to produce in this landscape that was, from a heritage standpoint, thought of as relatively empty beforehand, is an entirely dense set of settlements where you had an enormous number of people. And I should add that at its height, Palm East properties as a whole employed, and of which Philippine Estate was part of, employed 1,200 indentured laborers. So we would expect a considerable amount of material. We also relied on high-tech imagery, including drone imagery, LiDAR, to locate those kind of features which might not necessarily be apparent on the surface. And so, for example, one of the things that this imagery is able to show is where there might be foundations that are buried underneath. I can talk about the technology behind this later on, but the important thing is that we were able to identify building footprints that were not necessarily apparent on that map that was produced in the mid-1950s. We then followed this up with intensive surface collection where students basically collected artifacts in a grid fashion every once in a while, and then targeted archaeological testing. What this enabled us to do then, and these are some of the materials that we came across. This, for example, is a sill or a grinding stone that we found, and then a padlock associated with one of the houses. And then we also found all those pots and pieces of glass. And now one of the wonderful things about that kind of material culture is that it actually has controllable dates. So we can assign not only what people were using, but when in history they were using it. Now, the important thing to know about this is that when we combine all of this information together, if we look in the lower left-hand side where those red squares are, that's where the map said the buildings should be. But if we look at all those points, those blue points indicate where the archaeological record says that the houses associated with indentured laborers should be living. So while we might have barracks that emerge in the 20th century along the road, it does appear that there is another village that has been buried by time previous to the 20th century, sometime between 1850 and 1913. Of course, this is all based on surface work, so we had to do what's called truth it. We had to excavate one of these foundations. And what you can see in the left and center are students from Trinidad, India, and the US and the Netherlands excavating the foundation of the house. And the students on the right-hand side, these are two University of West Indies students, screening or actually going through the soil slowly with a sieve to pull out any of the material culture that they found. What we found was the kind of material culture that one might find on many laborer estates in the second half of the 19th century. We have pottery and plates and glass bottles associated with domestic use. We have whole wine bottles and liquor bottles. And I want to point out that this is probably not indicating that they were drinking liquor or wine. Oftentimes people use these bottles to store water, or in the case of Trinidad, we also have to think about how they might have been used as for flambeaux, for torches. And then finally, the upper right-hand side, we have tobacco pipes. All of these are fairly common items. And actually, we might even find these on contemporary and formerly enslaved settlements on other islands. What really made it distinct was a suite of material culture. So for example, on the upper right-hand side, you have a fragment of a dia or an oil lamp that we really do associate with ritual. We have a sill or a grinding stone in the lower right-hand side. And in the left-hand side, we have evidence of local pottery, and in this case, a spout for a water jar. And why this is important is not just identifying these artifacts in a specific place and time, linking to cultural practices. And that's incredibly important. But what it also says is the social and economic network that brings these out to being. To make a water pot, to make a dia, to make a grinding stone requires a series of craftspeople behind it, behind this ultimate use. And that links us into a larger social network. And so while we do know that pottery was being made in Trinidad associated with the plantations in the 19th century, these are potters on the left-hand side who immigrated from Barbados. We also know by the 1950s, we have potters located throughout the island. And this is from a pair of anthropologists who were documenting craftspeople in Penaldebe in the mid-20th century. And that we can then actually trace the itineraries. Pottery is an interesting thing because we can actually not only find out where it was used, but through chemical sourcing analysis, find out where it was made, and then then we could actually trace the itineraries of people going to market, for example. Now, what's also interesting is that some of these collections are in Trinidad, but there are actually what are called orphaned collections throughout the world. So the picture on the right, in the center that you see is a coal pot from the Milwaukee People's Museum. And the Niehoffs, those anthropologists, brought back a whole suite of water jars, coal pots, as well as prayer flags and other materials that is now on display. And if any of you are in the region, I do highly recommend going visiting it. I'm currently in the process working with them on three-dimensionally rendering each of these artifacts and digitally repatriating these materials back to Trinidad. So if we can think about some of the concluding thoughts about archaeology and indentureship, I think there's two things that three things I really like to focus on. First, the material culture documents the priorities of the people who used them in the past. And this includes from the types of foods people privileged, how they cooked it, where they cooked it, but it also thinks about the way that they arranged their lives and livelihoods. While people were maybe moved into a space designed to house a laborer, they made that space into a place by arranging things, people, and places in certain parts of that household. So documenting those spatial arrangements and those material repertoires become really important. Importantly, they also document the predicaments. One of the things I always like to think about is that people who were forcibly or through contracts migrated from places like South Asia to the Americas, is that their climates were changing, right? While they remained in what were the global tropics, the particularities of wet and dry season, the plants, the animals, the relationships they had with the environment around them changed dramatically. And so that they had to become climate engineers to make everyday life work. And so one of the things that these material culture shows us are the various experiments and solutions that they came up for with those challenges in the past. I think the final thing that I really enjoy about material culture as someone who works on the past is the way that it can create new questions. It can offer new insights. Now, this is sometimes done by finding something that no one had expected to see before, such as finding the village where the map said it wouldn't be. But it's also really done when sharing that material culture with community members and the community members prompting particular questions that, quite frankly, I was not smart enough to ask to begin with. And so when I think about putting all of these things together, and again, I'd like to highlight that this is a project very much in the beginning, that material culture offers not only answers to very specific questions, such as those posed by Brinsley Summeroo, but it also opens up new avenues of inquiry. And finally, by example of that, if we go back again to some of the climate challenges we're facing today, when you look at the landscape as a whole down in southern Trinidad, what you see is a history of human alteration to make lives and livelihoods better in it. And one of the things we can do is document that for the present. Thank you very much.
No, Dr. Mark Hauser, thank you very much. What an exceptional presentation. All the while that you were highlighting the artifacts that were found on the Philippine estate, I'm just thinking of that, the 1,200 indentured immigrants who were employed there. I can just think about their descendants. Now that you found these artifacts, can you imagine how it must feel to them to know that they can come there and they can touch something that their foreparents would have touched, used, interacted with in some way? It's fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for doing this very, very important work. You and the members of the team. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to shout out again to all of the team members, all of my co-PIs who really made this possible.
Thank you. So, to members of the audience, both on Zoom and on YouTube, I'll ask you to please, again, hold your questions. But to those of you on YouTube, feel free to put your questions in the chat box and we will pass them on to the speakers at the end of our next presentation. So thank you very much, Dr. Hauser. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce our third and final speaker today, and this is Dr. Julia Haynes, who is also from the US. She's an assistant professor of anthropology at Syracuse University, whose research examines the archaeology of indentured plantation laborers in colonial Mauritius. Welcome, Dr. Haynes.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Let me
You're
just
welcome.
share. Can you all see that?
Yes, we are seeing your slides.
Okay, great. So yeah, thank you so much for Dr. Mahbir for organizing this and inviting me, and for Mark to connecting us, and Shalima for being the moderator. It's an honor to be here, especially as a bit of an interloper like Salva Kumar, as working in the Indian Ocean, not the Caribbean. So I'm excited to think about some of the sort of transoceanic connections and comparisons, and I'm really looking forward to any comments and questions that you have at the end. So today I'm going to present a little bit of an overview of the archaeological research I've been conducting in Mauritius for almost more than a decade at this point. And you'll see a lot of overlap in terms of the type of artifacts that I found in Mauritius to the kind of artifacts that Mark just presented, as well as the sort of process of archaeological research that we did on this island in the Indian Ocean is quite similar also to what Mark has been doing. So Mauritius is a very small island in the Indian Ocean. It's about 200 square kilometers. It's part of an archipelago of other volcanic islands in the southwestern Indian Ocean. It has a population of 1.2 million today, so it's quite densely populated. It used to be at least the most densely populated country in Africa. And Bredo is an archaeological site that's particularly unique because it was a sugar estate, but is now preserved in the boundaries of a national park, the Brado National Park. And so after the sugar mill and the field estates were abandoned at the turn of the 20th century, the property was purchased by the Colonial Forestry Department. And so this sort of fortuitously allowed the site to be preserved to an extent that we often don't see today archaeologically, or there wasn't any other developments that occurred on the site, literally within the boundaries of the plantation. The site was declared a national park in 2011 based on a handful of endemic species that survive in the park. And then I started conducting research there in the southern winter of 2014 for my doctoral work. And so all of this work was conducted over about 20 months. And the core archaeological team, as Mark pointed out, archaeology is never really done alone. So the whole team was comprised primarily of 6 young Mauritian archaeologists from neighboring towns and villages who are shown here. I was able to pay them, luckily, through grant funding, and also conducted with the Mauritius Archaeology and Cultural Heritage Project, which is directed by Dr. Krish Sita at Stanford University. And so with the team, we conducted survey, excavations, archival research, and artifact analysis. And also, again, as the site is a national park, the work was also done in collaboration with park rangers who work in Prado year-round, right? And so their job most of the time is to manage the natural heritage of the site, right? So looking after the native and endemic flora and fauna that live in the site. But it's been a really interesting opportunity to work with them and with the Mauritius sort of nature conservancy groups on the site to think about this kind of intersection of natural and cultural heritage together just within this one site alone. So just very briefly, the history of Mauritius is, I can talk about this more during the Q&A, but just very briefly, it was, the other thing that's unique about Mauritius is that it had no endemic population. And so it was sort of quote unquote discovered, right, by the Portuguese originally. We think the earliest maps of Mauritius are on Portuguese maps, but it wasn't officially settled until end of the 1500s by the Dutch. Their settlements failed. They abandoned them. The French took over the island. And then during the Napoleonic Wars, the British took the island from the French in 1810. So famously, Mauritius is the land of the dodo. So of course, this famously extinct bird lived and was endemic, so only existed in Mauritius itself until it became extinct, due primarily both to human and also non-human settlement on the island. So humans and all the animals like rats, right, that came along with ships to the island during colonization. So, so the period that I really focus on is during the British period. So again, 19th century, when a range of indentured laborers ended up settling in Mauritius, as Professor Selva Kumar and Professor Hauser sort of went over the history. I won't belabor this, right? But the majority of indentured laborers came from Mauritius, but of course there were others, including at Brado, which we know from archival records, that came from China. And then on the island itself, also from Eastern Africa, Madagascar, and to a lesser extent, the Arabian Peninsula. So archaeologically, the site itself, Prado, was established as private property at the end of the 1700s. All of the archaeological evidence that we have, and as Mark said earlier, ceramic data for us as archaeologists is really critical to dating archaeological sites. And so we can't quite figure out exactly why yet, but for whatever reason, all of the archaeological data that we have of the site really is solidly dates to the indenture periods, the very end of the slave period into the indenture period. So we know that the house occupations that we've been excavating at this site, we can sort of solidly say that they were the housing that indentured laborers were living in at this time, despite this earlier occupation of the site and this later sort of history of the site after the sugar mill closed and the site was reforested by the Colonial Forestry Department. So the first step to any archaeological project is some kind of survey. So for us, this part of the island in Mauritius is very, very rocky. It's kind of shocking once you walk through the landscape to think of anybody growing sugar here, because this black volcanic basalt is just all over the surface of the park. So it would have been quite a laborious effort to actually plant sugarcane here. But so what that meant archaeologically is that a lot of the foundations of houses, of structures, of walls were actually above the surface. They had never been buried before. There was no sort of soil accumulation on top of them. And so what we could do was spend about 6 months mapping the entire site. And so you can see us doing some digital mapping here with what's called a total station, uncovering. They weren't buried by soil, but a lot of the walls were buried by just like tropical undergrowth. So there's a lot of macheting through some pretty dense vegetation. And this is the results of that map. So you can see the lighter yellowy orange is the boundaries of the original sugar estate. That's still the boundaries of the national park today. And then the little circle, all the little orange squiggly lines that you can see here, those are stone foundation walls that we uncovered and mapped. And inside that circle is what we've identified as the domestic quarter. So this is where all of the 200 to 550 indentured laborers would have been living during the 19th century when the estate was growing sugarcane. As Mark mentioned, the sort of orientation and housing and the configuration of that housing is one of the really interesting things we can look at archaeologically that we don't get a great understanding of how people use space within the archives. We can look at these kind of questions archaeologically. And so this is really where we focused most of the attention after we had mapped the entire estate. This is where we did most of the excavations on the site, was to sort of see what we could find out about indentured life in the past. What were people eating? How were they potentially relating to one another? Who were they living with? Or how were they living in terms of how were they constructing family or kin within these kind of structures based on the archaeological material culture. So right off the bat, from the mapping project, we found that there was two different kinds of types of housing. One are these long line barracks, which you can see in red. Right, so very orderly and sort of linear, right? And then the little blue squares or rectangles there's about 52 other what we call detached dwellings. So houses that were built of various sizes, but sort of roughly one room houses. And then in between those are these kind of squiggly serpentine green lines, and those are also walls. So it shows that people not only were living inside their homes, but also living outside their homes. So that exterior space was also important to them, that being able to grow gardens, cook outside, raise animals outside was important, and defining that space within this very large community, right? Up to archivally the largest number of people living on the plantation that we found so far is 550. Including about 50 children, right? So within that community, it seems that people were sort of defining these spaces the best they could, right? Within a community of people that they actually don't know, right? They're traveling from India or from other parts of Asia on these ships with strangers, essentially, most of the time. And so defining your own kind of space, even within the confines of the plantation, seemed to be something that was important to people. These are historic photos from the 20th century, but you can see, particularly on the one on the right here, this sort of stone foundation. That's exactly what we would have uncovered right here. So stone foundation on the bottom left here looks almost identical to the one here behind this little goat. And so this is typically what the upper portion or the upper story of the house would have looked like. the sort of natural thatching done with plants. Merchants today, it's not common anymore since corrugated metal is a preferred roofing material, right? But there's local knowledge people that people still know how to do this sort of straw and wood thatching. Oops. Okay, so shifting to excavations, as I mentioned, one of the key things that we did at the site was to focus on excavations in the domestic quarter. And the barracks and the detached dwellings sort of set up this automatic comparison or natural comparison for us to think about sort of who was living in either place, and are there differences in the choices people are making in terms of consumption of who was living in the barracks and who was living in the detached dwellings. So we excavated areas of both of those and found a pretty interesting range of artifacts. I mean, one of the interesting things we found is that overall there doesn't seem to be a ton of difference in terms of the types of things people had access to. So in both places we find little pieces of umbrella parts or locks and keys, padlocks and keys. The same types of ceramic are found across both the barracks and the detached dwellings. Oops. Oh, this is a typical indenture contract that you'd find in Mauritius, right? So contracts for immigrant wages provide not just usually about 5 rupees a month, so pretty menial wage, but also typically food included in that contract. So rice, tall or lentils, right? Oils or ghee, saltfish, and salt are typically supposed to be provided by the estate to indentured laborers. So one of the interesting things, again, we found with this site is that the kinds of material culture that people are engaging with is going well beyond, right, the types of things that the estate is actually providing in these contracts. So this is like a slide of my favorite things that we found, honestly, but yeah, so this is the sort of more intimate small items that we find. So most of the ones on the left, these are items that people would have worn on their bodies. So buttons, the sort of 3 at the top here, these are really interesting. These are British regimental buttons. So it seems like based on oral histories also that indentured laborers were buying secondhand British jackets or uniforms. They were typically made of wool. They would have been warm, well tailored. So there's this sort of secondhand market from military goods that they're purchasing on the island. Over here we have the little umbrella parts, the thimble, little bell. These are French coins or French franc, dating to 1841, 1844, I think. This is also interesting because the island is British at this point, right? It's under British authority. So one of the reasons I think these might have been French coins is that all of the sugar planters who were on the island when the British took over were left in place. And so there's a lot of sort of legacy connections to France, to the island of Réunion, which is still French, even after the island becomes British in terms of the government, right? And so we find francs, even though typically we sort of shouldn't, right, in this kind of context or British context. And these are sort of decorative items, this little yellow glass bead ring and potentially a fragment of a bangle. So other artifacts, so this is a collection of cooking implements, so a grindstone for preparing spices, knives. This is a little selection of gun parts. This is a gun flint, probably for hunting. This metal fragment here is called a marmite in Mauritius. It's a cooking pot today. And then a range of ceramics, again, as Mark said, these are ceramics that are really ubiquitous across the globe in the 19th century. Same ceramics, if you might recognize some from Mark's slides, right? That we find the same ceramics in the Indian Ocean as in the Caribbean. but the choices in terms of what types of ceramics people are taking seem to be varied or interesting. So, for example, in Prado, in the domestic quarter, we don't find any serving dishes or teawares. All of these are plates, shallows, plates or bowls, and maybe very, very small handful of cups. So it seems like if you think about the kind of diets that people are maintaining in the Indian Ocean, rice and lentil is sort of the key diet, right? Which we find from the macrobotanical remains. So these are burned remains that we get archaeologically from the soils. We know from the archives, from those contracts, but also from here, right? Rice and lentil is or peas in general, right? Legumes remains the sort of main diet, and that makes sense that people be eating these on individual plates and bowls. They're not sort of adopting this kind of formalized, right, Victorian English or British dining tableware situation, right? They don't have full, beautiful sets of serving dishes, right? They're eating sort of on their own terms and how they would have potentially in their homelands. The other thing to think about in terms of the foodways is that, right, so rice and lentil based diet, of course, in India, but also in East Africa, right? And so the sort of history of Indian Ocean connections within the Indian Ocean is a much has a much deeper history than just the colonial history, right? So as early as the 5th or 6th century CE, archaeological research has shown that there have been exchanges from the Indian subcontinent to the east coast of Africa. And one of the reasons this was possible was because people aren't cutting across the ocean, but actually skirting the coast. And so based on the monsoon currents, the monsoons switch directions about halfway through the year. And so you're able to go from India or from Southeast Asia along the Arabian Peninsula down the coast of East Africa and then back again within a single year. And so this allowed for these sort of long-term, very deep exchange networks to occur. And so what we find, right, from the botanical remains, if we think about it in sort of this much larger network and exchange system, is that grass pea and pigeon pea, both are legumes or beans that are eaten in East Africa as well. These are not crops that could be grown locally in Mauritius. So they would have been, they require a seasonal cold season that we don't have in Mauritius. And so they would have been imported much in the same way that they would have been transported across the ocean in earlier periods in the Indian Ocean. So going back a bit to material culture, just oil lamps. These are from the Appavatighat Trust Fund, actually. So it's another site in Mauritius that I won't get into, but just wanted to throw it in there because I know Mark was showing some oil lamps. Hookah and chilam. So these are smoking pipes and kaolin pipes, and this is the other sort of one of the ways I want to think about how are we doing archaeology in the Indian Ocean or potentially in the Caribbean, right? And thinking about or interpreting that material culture as embedded within a contextual perspective or from an Indian Ocean perspective, avoiding the kind of assumptions that have long shaped historical archaeological research. So, for example, these white kaolin pipes, so the ones shown on the right, are typically interpreted in a North American context where most historical archaeology has been conducted. We think about these as these like individual personal pipes that everybody would have their own pipes. You don't share them. There's different interpretations in terms of signs of smoking these things or signs of status, right? But when we think about that in terms of an Indian Ocean context, smoking is actually a collective action, right? Hookahs are smoked collectively. They're smoked socially. They're not really smoked individually. And so do we still interpret kaolin pipes within this context in the same way in terms of the sort of social aspects to those? Despite the fact that they're, right, it looks like a European, right? These are produced in Europe. They're imported from Europe as opposed to the hookah and chilam, which are probably imported from India, not made locally. Okay, and then I know I'm running low on time, but I just want to very briefly talk a little bit about some differences that we found between the detached dwellings and the line barracks. So as I said, the material culture overall, we find the same types of things, but one of the things we can look at statistically in archaeology is differences proportionally. So in the line barracks, we actually proportionally find more glass and ceramic artifacts, and in the detached homes, we find proportionally fewer glass and ceramic artifacts. So when we think about, again, thinking about these objects in terms of context, as Mark mentioned, these glass bottles, often they're thought of as alcohol bottles, but actually there's been a lot of work done by him and others to argue that these are probably being also reused as water bottles or to hold other types of liquid. And so if we think about this in the context of the indentured labor migration, one of the sort of predicaments that the indentured laborers faced was crossing the Kalapani and potentially losing caste status, or traveling and living in the confines of a ship, of a barracks that is communal living, where they don't actually know the caste status of the people that they're living with, because they're living with strangers, right? And until they sort of form their own kinship ties, right? So potentially one of the ways to sort of, again, think about the context or interpret these materiality of indenture, not from this kind of European perspective, but from an embedded Indian Ocean perspective, is to think about, well, maybe people in the line barracks, right, this sort of communal living space, are actually using more glass bottles and or drinking, right, water bottles or ceramic artifacts, their own individual plates, because they're living in this kind of social context where they don't actually know other people's caste. And so asserting this kind of embodied notion of caste, where you're not meant to share water, you're not meant to share saliva, you're not meant to bathe in the same waters as other people, right, from different castes. This was a way to kind of assert a caste identity, or protect yourself and your purity, right? Through this kind of consumptive practice. Whereas in the detached dwellings, these are smaller housing, potentially people who already consider them each other kin. And so it would have been less important to kind of assert those material differences or those embodied differences within these kind of smaller houses. And so proportionally, we find fewer glass and ceramic artifacts. And Mark and I have both looked at this through comparing the water structures in Tamil Nadu and in Mauritius. And so this is one of the wells and sort of water infrastructure that we find in Prado. So you can see here there's a well, and then these water channels that connect the well to, they also kind of slope down, and these connect the well to these different tanks of water. And so one of the ways we've thought about this is thinking about, okay, well, there's laborers coming from Tamil Nadu where in Tatangudi, where both Mark and Dr. Selvakumar have done research, they found that wells have different names and different uses within the villages. So maybe something similar is happening in Brado, where the well and different tanks have different uses and different purity or impurity connections, right? So if you think about the well as being the most pure source of water, and then sort of going down from there, but maybe you would water your animals at the farthest well. The drinking water would come from the well, and then, right, other things, something in between those two would happen in kind of the middle space. Okay, and then very, very, very briefly, I just want to say that also part of this research has been, again, collaborating with the National Park and Conservation Services, who manages the site today, to think about the conservation plan for this site, and the site itself as being, again, both a cultural heritage and a natural heritage site. And so how do we promote both of those things simultaneously, rather than as these kind of disjunctured or distinct things from one another? Part of the project is also doing outreach to Mauritians who are interested in their heritage, as Shalima mentioned, and I experienced myself working with the descendants, young descendants of indentured laborers who were part of the field team, that there's sort of a personal connection that Mauritians have to the site and to the artifacts that we find. And so we've done a lot of sort of public tours and public outreach and public engagement with the artifacts to kind of share what we found and also to get insights into the artifacts that we find on the site today. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you so much. I look forward to your questions.
Another excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Haynes. I want to take our questions in the order in which it was being asked, if you don't mind. And let me just remind everyone, if you have a short question or a comment, please go ahead, raise your electronic hand, which you will find in the reactions button at the base of your Zoom screen, and we can call upon you. So Dr. Shadanan has been waiting for quite some time to ask a question. I think we should give him the first opportunity. Dr. Shadanan, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and muting. Yes, thank you very much. It's a very important meeting today. Thanks to all. My question is especially to Dr. Selva Kumar. You mentioned that a number of million South Indians has been transported as Girmitias to the several locations. Is that the exact number, sir?
Actually, I mentioned about 1.6 million total,
Girmitias.
not only South Indian. Yeah, 1.6. Yeah.
Girmitias. Okay,
Yeah,
I thought you mentioned only in South Indian. Okay, my second question is...
Yeah, South India actually, yeah, South India, overall Indian, but South India, you have a very high in current state population. It has become 1 million or more than 1 million
Okay,
in
okay, thank you. But you
Malaysia.
mentioned also
Okay, but
other countries like Burma
yeah,
and
right.
other lands.
Yeah,
Was there also
yeah,
Girmitias?
mainly to Sri
Or were
Lanka.
there,
Sri
or
Lanka
were
is
there,
quite a lot.
or
Yes.
were there Indians? There is
Yeah,
a
they
difference.
were also other Indians, South
Because
Indians.
there is a
Sometimes,
difference. There's a difference
yes.
between Girmitias and India diaspora, very clearly. Okay, the last question. As you know, the Dutch were busy to start slavery in Dakshin Bharat. Do you have records about this?
Yeah, actually, slavery, it might have
Slavery.
yeah,
Okay.
slavery, it might have started. We have reference to people undertaking funerary ritual for as early as say first century, second century BC. So this might be one of the process, and it might have started earlier when the agriculture developed. See what really happens when the agriculture developed, they start using the labor service of non-agrarian group, for which we have reference at least for 2000 years.
Okay.
We have reference in the early Tamil literature. Some people even say in the Indus civilization, there could have been these kind of laborers working. We don't know whether slavery existed. There are certain images which are attributed to these kind of people who are offering labor services. The condition for the emergence of slavery starts with the employment of labor services.
I'm
That
very
is how it
curious
starts.
to
Yeah,
archive.
then gradually,
Yeah.
there is a negotiation between the employer and the employed. So then it develops into slavery.
But
So
as
we
I
can
okay,
definitely, yeah.
okay. As I know, Shivaji Maharaj, you know him very well. He stopped slavery in Dakshin Bharat, because he said over my dead body, and they put the Dutchman out of Dakshin Bharat. That's what I have learned.
Yeah,
If you have archives, please would you like to share this, because it is very important to know.
Yeah, I will check. Actually, what happened even till even today, there is slavery existing without the knowledge of the law. 6 months back, there is a case reported in Tamil Nadu in some of the brick kilns where people were had to work like slaves. These cases have been reported continuously for several years. They exist only even though the government bans some corners, some quarters in a remote area, it exists.
Okay.
Thank you. I hope I answered your question. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, thank you. May I inform you that we have a meteorology, Dakshin Bharat meteorology. There is a running there for the
Okay.
South
Okay.
Indians.
Nice.
I can send you the contact.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Dr. Virasamy, that's a very important revelation. I just wanted to ask you a question as well about the Kankani Chindu. You quoted a number
Chindu
of
and Chandu.
lines from that particular
Yeah.
poem,
Yeah.
and I'm just wondering about the origin of that particular one. Can you say date, time, and the manner in which it was found?
Actually, Sindhu is a kind of literary tradition that emerged in the 18th, 19th century. It is a popular literary tradition, Sindhu. So there are Sindhus on different themes. This one is on the this indentured laborer. This document you can find in British Library. I collected this from British Library. There is one Sindhu related to this indentured laborer. This name is Kappal. Kappal is ship. Kappaletum Kankani. The meaning is the Mestri who forcefully put people on the ship. So this Sindhu is a literary tradition that critiques some of the evils of the society. There are Sindhus on different themes, different negative activities on the. There are also positive. There are something on gods also. So there are some which are eulogistic in nature, some which are talking about the fame of the person. Some of them they really address the social evils. So they are using it is like any educated person can write it. It became popular in the 19th century. So that is the context when this was happening. So they composed this. It is a kind of popular the literature. There is also classical version. People who are very well versed in literature with a lot of skills and literary knowledge, they can compose a classical Sindhu, and then there are people who are laymen, they can compose these kind of evil. This is something very interesting. It is more than 100 years old, this particular document
Right.
I
So,
consulted.
so,
Yeah.
so why I'm asking, if it's over 100 years old, um, British indentureship ended in 1920. If it's over 100 years old, you're talking about coming down to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
end. But the
yeah.
conditions that that indentured laborer was speaking to would have
Mm.
been somewhere earlier. So I
Yeah,
just
but
wondered where, and what territory was that written?
yeah,
Do
it
you
is in
know?
the Tamil Nadu, East Coast, Coromandel Coast area. Coromandel Coast area. It was
So it
composed.
was written in Tamil Nadu and not a particular territory, not one of the
Yeah,
colonies.
yeah. Not particular territory. They understand the developments on the east coast
Okay.
of southern India. Yes.
Okay,
So
very
even though it is
interesting.
Tamil Nadu, you have at that point of time it was Madras presidency. You have people
Yeah.
from all areas, Karnataka and all entire South India being present on the east coast. So many people travel to these ports, and there are people who are familiar with. That is the time press became popular. The print culture emerged. So previously, people were writing things on the palm leaves. So this is the time print culture became popular after the introduction of the printing press. So a lot of these small kinds of textbooks were printed. Madurai was one area where many of these printing presses were present. So they were publishing these kind of popular literature, short booklets, maybe 6 7 pages, and then they circulated among the people. So it is also closely related with the print culture and the distribution of these composition to various people.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Yes, Dr. Haynes.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask a follow-up. Selva, is there a tradition of oral poetry in Tamil Nadu? Like, is it possible that there were earlier versions of this, of like this sort of warning poem that people would have recited to people who were non-literate and in the kind of earlier period? And that this is just kind of
Yeah,
it ultimately got written down,
yeah,
but
there were some oral traditions, people composing, they were called kavirayas, they were writing poems, recording these things till the introduction of the modern education during the colonial period. They had arithmetic methods, they were teaching different kinds of indigenous knowledge system, which was abruptly stopped with the introduction of Macaulay introduced education system. But some of these knowledge was preserved till about 1980s. But with regard to these, diaspora, there are people whose descendants live in different parts of the Kaveri Delta. I met one lady who was in Malaysia. She is about 93-year-old. She knows the name of the ship. She also tells a story. I know one of my students' mother was in Burma, and their grandfather. Some of them are born there. They live in Tanjavur itself. There is a colony called Burmese colony, where if you go, you can meet them. They preserve the knowledge, what they were told. That person only told me that these people were told them there were trees in which gold is grown. They can go and simply pluck them. And some of these people belong to the marginalized community, and they simply trusted and they went. And some people do not protest, especially among this working class. They comply with the authority. That is one of the reason why slavery emerges. This must have happened. If you look at Indian literature, sometimes people adopt it. It is also associated with some sort of bhakti or devotion to the master, not to the god, devotion to the master and loyalty. So you have to look at the slavery from multiple angles, not the way in we look at it. Sometimes it is people themselves, they comply with, they accept the role. So it is much more complicated in the medieval period and earlier. There are also palm leaf manuscripts. Apart from archives, there are also palm leaf manuscripts, and they sometimes shed light on this, especially the money lenders. The palm leaves were maintained not by the ordinary people, especially the money lenders, and some of these communities, they preserve the palm leaves, in which there are also slavery documents. They are also there of the colonial period. Even before the colonial period, this practice existed. So where people, even today it so happens, some of the workers, to undertake wedding, and also to even to perform their funerary rites, they take loan. They say that sometimes they go for a simple funerary ritual, because it can be very expensive. Even to conduct a funerary ritual, you have to borrow money. So they start adopting a simpler funerary ritual, even for wedding. So for such kind of events, birth of new baby, and wedding and death, they take loan. During in that process, they become sort of slaves. They have to repay. They say sometimes people charge so much money, they are caught into the cycle of the slavery, sometimes slavery and forced labor.
Very interesting. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much for sharing that. Chand Gupta on YouTube is commenting that Megasthenes, I hope I pronounced that correctly, talks about slavery in his 4th century work Indica and states that slavery was banned within the Maurya period, the Maurya Empire.
It is
Is that
true
correct?
that like I said, even 21st century, though it is illegal, things are happening in certain areas. Although Mauryan emperor, they might have banned it in certain areas, it is not necessary that it was not adopted. We have later inscriptions where some individuals, there is a place called Tripampuram in Tamil Nadu, where inscription records they sold themselves to the temple. So though Mauryan king might have banned it, it is not necessary that it was adopted all over. So people might have complained, they might have banned it, but these practices continue to exist even today.
Mhm. Remarkable. Thank you very much. Let's take another question from Kumu Gupta. Kumu, go ahead, please, and mute your mic. Kumu,
Yeah.
go ahead,
Oh,
please.
one second. 1 second. Yeah. Hi. Yeah, fascinating, very fascinating. I have a question which perhaps it's for all the speakers, but more so for the US speakers. Um, so in today's world, what is the propagating factor that the research into these areas is still being done in a big way? Because especially in US, projects and topics are sponsored based on the funds and things like that. So I was just curious. I mean, any research can go on. There's always so much more to learn, but I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps I'll take this as I might be a little bit less precarious at this point in my career. So the funding landscape in the United States has gotten very difficult, especially if you're interested in issues of inequality, identity, and understanding the complicity of empires in bonded labor, capitalism, etc. So, for example, funding that we would have typically have gotten, and indeed Julie and I have gotten these in the past, are from the National Science Foundation, National Endowment of the Humanities. That being said, there's also a fairly robust private sector funding apparatus through not-for-profits. So there's an organization called the Wenner-Gren Foundation for Anthropological Research. There's the National Geographic Society, as well as other kinds of groups. And oftentimes we work in collaboration, so we don't have to work solely with the precarities of the US funding situation in this particular moment. That being said, I would say that part of our work, or part of our work as faculty, is probably, writing 4 grant proposals for every article that we write to ensure that we can carry out research the way we do. And what I will add to that is that I also think that there is just also considerable interest amongst community members around this kind of work, so that it's the kind of thing where we hope that we can kind of develop capacity, but not necessarily be the last statement in the work that's being done. Does that answer your question, Kumu?
I think she would be satisfied with that answer, yes. So let me ask another question. When you did work, well, you're currently working at the Palmy's site, Palmy's Park, really, which is in the Philippines estate, yes?
Yeah. 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 It's in the former Filipino state, yeah, which is just southwest of San Fernando.
Yeah,
Southeast of San Fernando.
right. It's interesting to me that you said it was the site of the first Tazia in Trinidad.
Yeah.
Did you find, I realized that you were speaking with a lot of informants and especially the elderly, which I absolutely love. Did you find any information coming from the elderly about those Tazias, about Hussein and so on, their participation?
I didn't, but I would also say that I'm very much at the beginning stage of this work. And I think, and Julia and Selva might be able to also chime in this. When we're working with community members, it's oftentimes not just one conversation and we're out of there. We keep going back and forth and continuing conversations and that's because the way memory works, the way that gaining comfort levels with each other also works. So I wouldn't say that the absence of evidence is the evidence of absence in terms of these knowledge situations. But what I would say is that there's definitely one of the things that in community conversations with elders so far that has been absolutely central is the very social nature of that space. That this was a place where people didn't just live, but it's a place where people would actually go to the pond. And as children, they would sneak in and swim in the pond while their parents weren't looking because their parents might get angry at them because they might drown or something. That was a conversation we had. So there's conversations like that about the way that they utilize the space while it was a village, but also after it was a village.
But
I hope that answers.
Partially, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
What was the purpose of the pond? Did anybody outline to you what role it filled in the estate?
Well, that pond was there to feed water to the community itself. Like it was a way to capture water. And it was enlarged by the owner, Lamont. And actually, at one point, Lamont installed a steam engine to move water from the pond up to his estate house as a
So
way to
it's
pump, as
essentially
a
for
pump.
domestic purposes, not
For
for
domestic,
cooling of equipment and machinery and all that
no,
sort
it
of
was for
thing.
domestic purposes.
Yeah. Okay,
And of
interesting.
course, it might have had multiple purposes domestic wise.
Watering animals and so on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
So, but again, that's something that's come really more so out of conversation with elder members of the community and not so much out of direct evidence, aside from the direct evidence of a steam pump right next to the well. But yeah, sorry, I didn't.
Did you find any evidence of other ponds?
Yeah, so this is one of the very interesting potentials of some of the tools that we had at display, which is that one kind of drone that I was using to map the area, it can not only tell you where present day ponds were, but where ponds were in the past that have been subsequently buried. And we can actually go ahead and identify those ponds and those tanks and then go back and look at it. And what becomes very interesting about that is for future sources of information, when we're talking about the pollens and the seeds that Julia brought up and I brought up, actually those kind of filled in ponds become time capsules for what the environment looks like at a particular moment in time. So you can see how maybe the introduction of certain crops or certain different plants from South Asia start to change the island.
Certainly, yeah. Thank you for that. Dr. Shardanan, your hand is up again.
Yes, yes. Once again, Dr. Silva Kumarji,
Yes.
I have a question to you.
Mm.
We are studying about Girmitias around Bharat, you know. But
Mm.
if I have a look into the studies, then the scholars are focused on the north part of Bharat, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar.
Mm.
What is the reason that Dakshina Bharat is under development in study and research and publication? Can you do something that?
Yeah, we there are literature. There are literature in Tamil. There are also literature in English. There are literature available, but still, I feel that we need to have some kind of uh, internet archives. What I feel is we need to have some kind of digital archives to bring in. There are people who are contacting me directly after seeing my department name from reunion. I have tried to help some people. I know a lady from South Africa who moved to Australia. She is in touch with me. Since we are from a maritime department, many people are contacting us to identify their native villages. We engage in conversation with them. So I think one thing will be good will be to create digital internet archives where public can come together and share the information. Currently, I feel though Indian government is doing, I think government alone cannot do it. So we need to have these kind of like yours and many organizations that should come together. If you look at Indian history very deeply, you will understand that it is not the government which did it. Many individuals, many association guilds. We also study merchant guilds. So these kind of associations can come together and create some kind of digital internet archives. Recently, we have been discussing with Kerala also. So that platform is lacking. Even they are also from Kerala, they have been focusing on studying people in South Africa. Though there are efforts by the central government, still we are lagging behind. That is something I think we need to do. Creating some kind of internet archives where people themselves can come and chat and give information. Even from my own contact, I know many people who are directly in touch with me when they come to India. And these literature are in different languages. That is one of the issues. We have people writing. There are many literature related to the Indian diaspora. Some of them are in Tamil, some of them are in Malayalam. So it is not just archaeology or history. It is much deeper. Cultural experience, monuments, and we need to have a system to document this Indian diaspora cultural heritage. Archaeology is one part. Then we have living. It's a huge. It can be a huge project. It's really indeed what you are suggesting is that we need to do some kind of integration. There are works happening. Even if government is organizing something, only few people participate in it. So we need to have a kind of digital with AI. I think we can do it. That is something we should do, and we should not depend upon the government. The certain agencies and institutions can come together and create such a kind of digital archives where people can interact and find their history. Many, especially the Indian diaspora, they are looking for this. uh,
I wanted to suggest you to do the same what the North Indians are doing. Gujarat
mhm.
University,
Yes.
Jawaharlal Nehru University, Banaras Hindu
Mhm.
University, and we are
Mhm.
doing now in JNU
Mhm.
and Lucknow University. I know that Modi ji is very helpful when you want to
Mhm.
organize an international conference
Mhm.
because of the language we have
Mhm.
Bharat, Dachin Bharat Girmitology. And the leader of this is Satya, Dr. Satya, and something more. And I think I have suggested her to
Any
organize an international conference just to bring more knowledge, awareness about the Girmitians who went to Mauritius. Someone went also to West Indies and Guyana,
yes,
and a little bit were in Suriname. I know that. Very small piece.
yes, yes,
I think these days, international conference you can organize for 2 or 3 days. We are ready to help you putting this one,
yes,
but bring South Bharat into the study, archival, and publication. It is very important what you have introduced today.
yeah.
Can
Thank
I
you.
inspire you to do that?
Yeah, sure,
Okay,
sure.
take
Yeah,
on.
maybe you send the contact of that
No, you
person
take
you
you take
said.
contact with Miss Salima
Yeah,
and
yes.
Kumar Mahabir. They are also members of Girmitology. They
Okay.
knows everything.
Oh,
Let they
okay. Thank
inspire
you.
you. I'll give you the background. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baba. I'm glad you raised that. And Dr. Perasamy, I don't know whether you know Kumaresan from the Center for South Asian Studies. So we will connect you because he was here. Is it last year, Dr. Mahavir? I think it was last year. He was here at a conference at the National Council for
Yeah.
Indian Culture, and he is indeed interested in having a conference there in Tamil Nadu. So there are several
Thank
persons
you.
who would be
Thank you.
very interested
Yes.
in attending that.
Thank you for that.
Terrific, thank you. I just wanted to raise a point, and this is for Dr. Haynes. When you spoke about the coins that you found, you said these were French coins dated to 1844. And I just wondered whether it was possible, perhaps, that these would have been brought from, for example, the Pondicherry area or French parts of India. Because you see, I'm seeing everywhere in the records that indentureship began in 1834. However, in 1828, the first ship with Indians, about 25 Indians, actually left Pondicherry on the 15th of April, 1828, to go to Reunion Island. And so it's very possible some of those on Mauritius would have come from the French areas. Your comment, please.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible. I think there would be ways to track that if we had the coins analyzed by a, what are they called? A numinist? There's someone who specializes in coins who could actually trace where they came from, or where they were minted even. Yeah, I mean, I think to me it was striking whether they came from France or whether they came from one of the French colonies. That the fact that they are French within the British, within the the colony had been British for 30 years by that point. So the fact that sort of French planters are maintaining ties to French colonies, whether or not they're hiring laborers that are coming from French occupied lands, or whether they themselves are using the coins and paying or giving them to laborers themselves. Regardless, it's sort of showing this kind of deeper connection of trans empire, really, right? That it's not, we think of the British Empire and the French Empire as these distinct things that only interact in terms of violence, and that's not necessarily true in terms of the colonists themselves, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'd like you to please just reply to Chand Gupta. You wrote it in the chat, but she's on YouTube. So you responded to her question. If an employer takes away the passports of his foreign workers and prevents their free travel, would that be considered slavery?
I messaged you
Yeah,
reply in YouTube, so but you can still say, yeah.
yeah. So, and that's a great question, and there's a lot of really good scholarship about sort of how do we even define slavery? What are the terms that we use? Is freedom the right term, or is actually that not applicable in places like like pre-colonial Pakistan, for example. So there's a lot of scholarship on this. There's definitely contemporary scholars who define that kind of captivity in terms of restricting movement. The example in the Indian Ocean are Bangladeshi workers primarily who go to different parts of the Arabian Peninsula, like Oman, and then have their passports taken away, and so their movement restricted. And so there's definitely scholars today who define that as a form of modern slavery. And there's similar examples of that. It's called blackbirding in Southeast Asia, around sort of Australia also. That blackbirding is sort of analogous to indenture, but then ends up having these sort of coercive elements as well.
She's saying there's a group in Fiji who bar their workers from outside contact. And she said last year 2 women escaped and reported to the media and police, and that's how it came to light.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I sometimes wonder this too in terms of the labor in Mauritius today. It's a big site for fabric and clothing finishing process. So they don't produce the textiles themselves, but produce the second sort of phase, so clothing. And a lot of those factories they're not Mauritian labor. It's labor that's coming, and also construction. It's labor that's coming still from the same areas. So particularly Bangladesh. So areas that at least are close to where indentured laborers were recruited from, and yet indenture, we say, it was abolished in 1920, right? But it looks very similar in terms of they're sort of given a 5-year visa. This kind of passport captivity is pretty common. And right, or even if they don't have their passport taken, they don't have the wages to return home on their own, right? And so they're sort of forced into this labor. And so I do sometimes think about sort of, yes, indenture was abolished, but there are other forms of exploitative labor that continue in some of the same ways, right?
Sad but true. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Haynes. And thank you, Navin, for multitasking in the background.
No problem. This happens in Trinidad also, right?
Yeah.
That passport issue also happens a lot here at some of our most popular restaurants.
Yeah, and I think that's the sort of the insidious part is that it's often smaller scale, at least the ones that I've seen. So it's within a household. Someone is a domestic worker and has their passport taken by their employer, but it's not, you don't have this like 300, 200 group of people that's a little bit more visible, right? It's individuals who are within the home, but then it happens in multiple homes, right? And I don't know if that's the case. Sort of the case what you're talking about, where like a restaurant, I imagine, would be a smaller scale than.
Yeah, so it would be workers who would have come, and then the restaurant owner takes away their passport and has them confined to a specific apartment, and they just back and forth from the restaurant to home kind of situation.
Yeah, thank you for that, Navin. And Dr. Haynes. And our final questions will go to Professor Hauser. Amar Wahab, nice to have you. He's asking, how does the team treat with the patterning in soil? And is the current work concentrated around previous sugar plantations? If so, is the team considering exploring the material records of cocoa plantations?
That's an excellent question. And so patterning in soil is a very interesting. The 2 points of the questions are really interesting. The first thing is how do we infer kind of social, cultural, historical actions out of what we see in terms of differences in soil and the way it's documented? And I think there's 3 ways that we traditionally do this. The first is the way that I introduced to you, which is to kind of use these what are called remote sensing techniques to see if we can't determine them based off of the differences in vegetation. I think that the second way is to go ahead and do what are called soil cores. We go around and we take basically 10 centimeter auger holes into the soil, and we have a specialist who can actually go ahead and document the size of the soil, the color, the various attributes that then enable us to infer how the land has been used. And the third is actually to open up fairly large areas of excavation. Now, I'm a little less happy about the third option because that in itself can be a bit extractive. And I think there's an irony in using an extractive technique to study the history of extraction. So I try and remain on the first two, which are these low impact techniques. In terms of cocoa, so one of the reasons why we chose the sugar plantation at Filipino State, and I'd like to say it wasn't just a sugar plantation, it was involved in many different kinds of economic activities, including copra production, including later on foodstuffs such as banana and plantain. But I think what I would say is one of the reasons why we chose it is because it had a degree of site preservation. So we could do a proof in concept, a proof of the concept here in Trinidad, that we can actually document and identify household remains and household structures related to indentured life. Moving on to the cocoa estates would be just absolutely fascinating for a variety of reasons. First, you could think about the differences in the labor regimes associated with sugar versus cocoa, but also the different kind of environmental contexts in which cocoa is grown versus sugar is grown, and see how people engage with the environment potentially differently. So yeah, we would love to account for cocoa estates, and if you have any suggestions on where to look, please let us know. We would be very excited to go ahead and do so.
Excellent, Dr. Mahabir. Why don't you speak to that, Coco?
Yes, so I've written a short article on indentureship in the cocoa estate and the coconut and the rubber. So you can, when we meet in August, Shalima and I and you, we can talk more on this, and I can point you to one of the first estates of cocoa cultivation and rubber and coconut. And we look forward to meeting you, and hopefully we, in conjunction with you, can organize a local tour to see your places of excavation and kind of generate more interest in what you are doing. Such valuable work.
Absolutely, I would be happy to, and I would also add that hopefully I think the CEO of the PDRC is hoping to put together a heritage festival in which one of the visits will be a visit of the site in progress as we're examining it. So hopefully we can organize that and have an event around the ICC with that.
Fabulous. Next month is Indian Arrival Month, the month of May. So it would be lovely if they could put on that Heritage Festival during that period.
Yeah, it would.
Wonderful. I want to thank you all very much for giving us of your time today and your expertise. Please do continue the fabulous work that you are doing. We would love to hear more later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll be in touch.
Cheers.
And let me turn you all over now to Ashley.
Yes, very informative presentations today. I do apologize for how I am sounding, but I do have the cold. So, but very informative. I listened as much as I could, as much as my brain will allow me to do today. And I feel like there's still more to learn on this journey. As an aspiring archaeologist, I have to say that. Just had to. I feel connected with the work that you are doing today. And I hope and I pray that this continues to grow into something bigger and better. And it is, I feel appreciative because as a descendant of a grammateer, to be able to connect with artifacts like that, as Shalima was pointing out, to be able to touch it, that would have been something that our forefathers touched as well too. And I think we have to remember that this entire island was once inhabited by grimetiers as well too. So who knows? I might find something in my backyard as well, because again, this entire island was definitely inhabited at one point in time. So, with that being said, I really would like to thank all of you, and I pray that you continue to do this work um, uh, effortlessly. And I would like to thank all of you for taking the time to be here with us, to listen, to be a part of us, and for participating. And again, thank you, Shalima, for being a great moderator as always. As was said earlier, the public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. Feel free to contact the ICC to publish your books. Remember that we are asking you to kindly give us your suggestions. If you give a donation, your name will be placed on our poster and all promotional materials. Please contact Dr. Mahabir for details. Our topic next Sunday will be part 2 of Re-Imaging Feminism after Indian Indentureship, and I look forward to this very much. Thanks to our planning team led by Dr. Kumar Mahabir and Shalima Mohammed. Thanks to our IT consultants, Navin Mangal and Daryl Grantham. And thanks to Daryl again for designing our poster. Please visit, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and see all our past recordings. With that being said, Danyavad, and thank you all for being here with us.